Namaste and welcome to this episode of Jaipur Dialogues Live. While we are waiting for Aabhas to join in, let me tell you tomorrow's schedule. This is tomorrow's schedule, eagerly awaited because a lot of people had been asking us to get Pushpenderji on Jaipur Dialogues. So he has very kindly consented to come on Jaipur Dialogues tomorrow at 10 p.m. And this is the topic that you have, Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb, ढकोसले का चूरन. चूरन सब समझते हैं ना आप लोग? You understand what is चूरन in Hindi? And this is of course going to be a rollicking show. It's going to be all in Hindi and Urdu because Pushpinder Singh ji has a very nice take on Urdu. Welcome, Aabhas ji.
Namaste.
I was just trying to keep everybody engaged. Welcome to the show, and we are already live. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
No, we cannot hear you. I think you are mute. Yes, okay. No, problem from my side. So I have not put my
yeah, okay. So how are you doing?
Earplugs on. So how are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Everybody here, you all know Aabhas ji because he has been on this channel and on this show a lot of times. And the first time that we are doing a live with him, and the topic is exactly up his street. It is called Victims of Communism. And when I introduce the topic, Aabhas ji, I'm looking for two kinds of victims, both the tangible victims as well as the intangible victims. I think as an ex-communist, you fully understand what I mean.
Yes, I do.
So let's start talking about the tangible victims of communism, the people who actually got killed, starting with the Mensheviks. Please do some kind of a little bit of a summary of all the killings that went on, starting from the Mensheviks, Lenin, and then Trotsky and Stalin, then the other Soviets. Then, of course, you have the Mao, and then you have the sundry other Pol Pots and things, and you have the Naxalites in India, and you have so many other places. So let's have a summary of all these tangible victims of communism first.
Yeah, so before we go deep into the things, I would just start off with the thing that Mao had once said that, it's always good to even kill people because even the dead bodies will make the land fertile. So that is how the idea of communism goes through and as many people have even quoted and cited that communism is more like a religion and it's more like a faith where it's always a fight with the non-believer. And whoever is not kind of gonna be agreeing to you is same as being a kafir and is supposed to be killed by hook or crook. So they call it, it's more about the class insurgency and it's about the class war. And because of that, they want to bring, there's a whole idea of bringing people at the equal playing board, which is actually not possible because the equality system works in a very different way. It's much more different. So, but yeah, coming back to that, if I broadly speak about the statistics, that the numbers of the killing, what has happened, as per the Black Book of Communism, it's around 100 millions which they killed. But later on, the number was even updated 6 years down the line. And after the Black Book of Communism came, the number was updated to 148 millions. And further, we don't have any updates for another 10 years, 20 years. So 2 decades have gone by. We don't have any further statistics over it because not much research has gone into the killings by the communists, because that has gone more into like the Naxal killing. And the Naxal killings are also something which is not very well documented. Because when I say about Naxal killings, the statistics say that it's only around till 2018, it was 16,000 numbers. But the number will certainly be a lot more because Naxals are also very pro in hiding the things and the numbers never come up about the original killings. So if I start with how many people were killed with the if I first pick up the statistics of Black Book of Communism, then they say that in China itself, the communism killed around 65 million people. Then when we come to Soviet Union, it was 20 million. And the interesting case in both these places, Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China, is that they have killed millions of Muslims and they have killed millions of Christians. The Soviet killings of Christians was something very horrific. A mass extermination happened. They had, and also we have got different kind of terminologies for the killings what communists did. So, and in China also right now we are witnessing the kind of atrocities which are going against the Uyghur Muslims. So it becomes very interesting that the communists and the Islamists try to be on the same page most of the time, the way they express it, right from the time when Direct Action Day happened. They have always been showing a lot of solidarity amid the two, among themselves. But interestingly, perhaps
Yes,
no one has. Yeah.
I think your speaker is on. I'm getting an echo. Yeah. So what happened was,
Yeah. So interestingly,
I think you mentioned that Jyoti Basu was present in the meeting that was done to plan the Direct Action
yeah,
Day,
yeah,
16th August 1946, and the meeting took place on 13th. I think you wrote that.
yes, yes. So what actually had happened that it triggered out because some kind of conversation was going around on Twitter, and I was baffled when I saw Yogendra Yadav's tweet that just cite me an example where communists have been involved in religious persecutions or communal violence or the riots rather. So even if we don't go that far to Russia about the political persecution of the religious religions like Muslims and the Christians, even if I just come to 1946 in the Direct Action Day, in the 16th of the August 1947 and 1946, the when the meeting of the Muslim League was happening, from where whole the thing started to occur, this man Jyoti Basu, along with two other MLAs, were present in the that very meeting, and that meeting had a lot of inflammatory speeches and a lot was spoken against the Hindus. So I don't know how even someone can say that communist was not even part of that violence. Then further, there were a lot of trade unions which were operating in Calcutta at that time. One of them was Tramway Workers Association. They took very active part in the all the killings of the Hindus. What happened there? Then the associations of the massacre which happened in the cotton mill, that was also again instrumented by definite a Muslim leader, but he was also a CPI ally. So CPI cannot keep themselves off and say that we are very clean in the religious violence of or the riots which happened around the partition. They were very much into it, and
And then not just that, if I may add,
yeah,
that the entire communist leadership was complicit in the Pakistan movement, and their top
yes,
leaders, one of the top leaders was Sajjad Zahir. He was CPI's top gun, and he stationed himself in Punjab, and the entire cadres from Punjab and from Kerala and from all over India, they were stationed in Punjab to facilitate Muslim League's campaign. In fact, Muslim League's campaign was almost exclusively run by the CPI. So all that happened later on, all the riots that took place, blame has to rest with the CPI also. That is the intangible killing, as I said, the tangibles and intangible.
yes. So and adding further to it, and I don't know because academicians are talking about communists not being part of the religious violence around the partition, but how they can miss the book, Brothers Against the Raj, and that book has quite a bit of details about what communists were doing around that time, and that is where in that book Hashim, who was the secretary of the Muslim League that time, who was a key man of Sohawardi as well, he was very second to Sohawardi, and he writes in his memoir that he was held by Nikhil Chakravarti, and Nikhil Chakravarti was a young communist leader of the CPI who helped them draft the whole position that what will happen in and how this thing about the direct action day and all the things are to come about. So CPI was definitely providing them the intellectual fodder, or rather, I would say the fodder to strategize whole of the thing. So there are always two parts. Like now we are dealing with the urban Naxals and Naxals in the jungles. So that time also they were playing exactly the role of the urban Naxals, or one can say that non-Islamic jihadis who were just trying to make sure that the most strongest idea which can stand against the communist in India, that is the Hindu idea, they were just trying the best that how they can suffocate it, and they were putting all their best means, whether it was about the creation of the program to facilitate the direct action day and furthermore. So yes, they were very instrumental in shaping the idea of Muslim League that time. And in fact, on 13th of August, 3 days before the this whole direct action day happened, Jyoti Basu had given a press statement, and he was very clear that if that press statement is decoded, it was very clear that we are not going to support. We are going to support the direct action day in the Muslim areas, and we are not going to support direct action day in the Hindu areas. So what does this mean? They directly meant that we are going to support the massacre of the Hindus. And the way the things went on further, that for 3 days the killings kept on happening, and when the Hindus saw that there is no help coming in, then they themselves took the weapons and thought that now we have to protect ourselves. And then this man brought in the army, and they were deputed, and the Hindus were killed mercilessly even from the government machineries that time. So it was all planned scheme according to CPI and the Muslim League altogether, what was happening around then.
Okay, so that we have come back to the Indian subcontinent, but we haven't dwelt enough on the Russian and Chinese atrocities, not only on their own citizens, but the Russians colonized almost half of Europe, and they also colonized a good part of Asia. And the way they subjugated those areas and the way they carried out massacres not against only people but also against their cultures, that also needs to be put into focus. One, and of course, Mao's a great leap forward in the cultural revolution and all that went on along with it. Plus, we also have to recall what was done in places like Vietnam and Cambodia, and even today, what is happening in Venezuela. All these places have to find a place in this pantheon of communist killings. That is
Yes.
one. And what is even more significant when we talk of intangibles, what exactly does communism do to destroy all other ideas? We know that it is a binary religion just like Islam and Christianity. But in what way are their methodologies different? Who are the unbelievers according to them whom they have to exterminate?
So, if I put it very categorically, and if I quote few people that because there have been a lot of works, and Rumil has written a lot about the communist ideology, that how it has shaped the idea to become so violent, why it is the way it is. So, if I just pick the first statement from the Black Book of Communism, then it clearly says that communist regimes turn mass crimes into full-blown system of government, and this criminality lies at the level of ideology rather than state practice. So what it means that once when the idea of communism faces any challenges, or they say that they see that there's some challenges which is going to upfront from any culture or any civilization, but to put it very precisely, actually communism has got problems with all the cultural ideas around, because everywhere wherever communism popped up, it was more of a reaction to the cultural things which were happening around. Like at times it also needs to be considered that most of the communist ideas which grew in Europe was majorly also because of the atrocities of the churches too, because churches were also getting into a lot of dogmas. And if we further link it to when all these guys came in, the modernist and the post, and all these things were cooking up the ideas of rationality, They were actually seeing that there's a lot of dogmas which is cooking up in the churches. And when this thing came up, then the scientific temperament people came and say that, we are gonna go against the churches. We are going to go against the religion of the place, which was eventually Abrahamic all around there. And then they started up with a idea against the culture. Eventually there was a Christianity, and that idea happened to deal with uh, regular persecutions. And if I remember a case in Soviet where one of the priests was killed in a way that his tongue was really chopped off, so that he can't really speak of anything pro the culture, pro tradition of the place. So their atrocities also has got a very certain and very different kind of level. If, if I talk about the Frederick Engel's ideas, then when he had published an article in 1849 in Marxism journal about the Hungarian struggle, then it can be noticed that he says that the Marxist theory of history required and demanded genocide for reasons implicit in its claim that feudalism, which an advanced nation was already giving place to capitalism, must in turn be suppressed by socialism. Entire nations would be left behind after a workers' revolution, feudal remnants in a socialist age, and since they could not advance two steps at a time, they would have to be killed. They were racial trash, and angels used to call them racial trash, and fit only for the dung heap of history. So, if one notices this, their ideas are very clear that if you are going to not agree to our idea, which is communism, they one side they claim that we are the rational people, but they are saying that if you have any kind of disagreement, then genocide is a possibility. It has to happen. And people at times argue that Marx was actually not talking about the genocide as in genocide of people, but he was talking about the cultural genocide. But culture is always with the people. People make the culture. So you can't destroy the culture unless you destroy the people. The way the whole conversion mafia works. It again is based on the whole idea that if you can't really change, if you really can't break down the idea of the people. There's a lot of massacres also which happened in the past when the forced conversion was being done either with the Portuguese or whether it was in the Islamist. So similar kind of model has been adopted by the communists at a very larger scale. And Rumil, as I spoke about the Rumil earlier also, and he has clearly said that communism was like a fanatical religion. It had its revealed text and its chief interpreters. So we can clearly compare it with how Islam works. It had its priest and its ritualistic prose with all answers. It had a heaven and the proper behavior to reach it. It had its appeal to faith, and it had its crusades against non believers. What made this secular religion so utterly lethal was its seizure to all states' instruments of force and coercion and the immediate use of destroy or control all independent sources of power, such as church, the professions, private businesses, schools, and the family. So he's very clear that, and if one just replace that word communism with, or the idea of communism with Islam, one can really make the that both are really leading to the same similar idea: destroy the non-believers. So that is very clear modus operandi of communist, whatever they may want to say, whatever way they want to pacify it.
Okay, I also like to discuss another very important issue, and that is that there is an artificial distinction. I'm putting on my own view that there is a distinction made between the National Socialism of Hitler and communism, and also the fascism of Mussolini and communism on the other hand. How do you look at it?
One thing is one thing is very clear that at times people don't want to relate it that way, but this is the truth that for me Hitler was a hardcore socialist, but people disagree with this opinion, because his idea, because if one reads the main Kampf book, and then he mentions a lot about socialist Caesar, And actually, there have been multiple debates about swastika. You have also have had a lot of chat about it and discussions over this forum. But what I read about the swastika, and further when I was looking into symbology aspects of it, then if one looks back at how the symbols were made, even the all the symbols were acronyms. Like if one looks at like how Volkswagen car got its symbol from, it was W and V, and it was always hook and cruise. That is a hook cross. Hook cross is what they were using as symbols for various things. So even one looks at other parties, socialist parties before Hitler too, they also had similar kind of symbol, and it always represent double S or n plus s, because Hitler never categorically wrote that what he is trying to mention or depict it as, but he speaks about socialist Caesar. So one way to decode it can be that it is s plus s, and hook and cruise or hook cross always needs two members. A cross cannot be a single member, that is swastika. So, and in fact, Hitler was not even aware about what swastika is. So his whole idea was to express socialist Caesar at a larger scale, and and he has called his own movement as a people's movement. It's a movement of the people. It's for the people that he is created. And interestingly, he never uses the term Nazi. Nazi is a term which appeared very late by the communist. He always called it National Socialist, called in German, whatever the word was. So he always wanted to be known as a socialist, but the communists later to run on upon the propaganda started calling it Nazis. So all this idea of Nazism or the fascism, where it comes from the Mussolini, and they are very much totalitarian in idea. We all know about it, and their whole idea was always inflated with the people's war. They always expressed that they came into power by a large support of the people, and they always try to appeal them, and they and that appeal kept them quite popular for a longer time. And had they not been socialists, they won't have been popular. No socialist can gain that much of popularity anywhere in any forum.
Okay, and also there is a fair record of Hitler's collaboration with the Islamists in the fashion of many communist regimes.
And people don't want to talk about it, but the Hitler had they want to blur they want to bring this association of Hitler with the swastika and this whole Aryan theory. Yes, Aryanism was a very popular phenomenon in Germany, and somehow they were using it, but Hitler had nothing to do with the Hinduism. But people have tried to banish Hinduism in the name of Hitler and the misconception of swastika. But his more important allies were the churches. His important allies were the Islamists. And in fact, Hitler had great relation with the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And that is where he collaborated. And the whole persecution of Palestine, of the Jews in the Palestine occurred in the clear eyes of the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. And it's very interesting that then people will say that, your Netaji had also met Hitler. But if in fact, people may feel bad about it, but Hitler was not ready to devote time, give even a bit of time to Netaji. All what he did at the last was to give a summary into, because you have done this much, so I will help you this way. But this Grand Mufti of Jerusalem was also supplied with arms. They used to meet quite often. There have been multiple meetings between the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem and the Hitler, and he had own Islamist regime. Nazis had got one regime of they were called Hitler's jihadis too. So Hitler had and all the terrorist organization which erupted later on, like Al Qaeda, followed the modus operandi of Nazis, the way they saluted. And if one goes into the creation of the terrorist organization, whether it's ISIS or whoever, they have very strong link with the character and the adjective of the Nazis or the National Socialists, to put it across like.
Yes, actually, I want to put forward the point that there is nothing that Hitler did which had earlier not been done either by the church or by the Islamists or by the communists. Each of them, Hitler copied to the T. Absolutely. He just went by the template that already existed. And later on, when he got defeated. His name got besmirched in the history as a loser. Then all these people, in order to wash their hands off Hitler, all of them denied their link with Hitler. After all, Hitler started out with an alliance with Russia. Russia can't deny that. It's only that there were some differences of opinion, and Hitler got too ambitious, and he needed some access to oil and all that. And that is why he turned against Russia, thinking that he would be able to steamroll Russia in the same way as he was able to do the Allied powers, France and Belgium and Poland. So that's where he made a tactical mistake, or even you could call it a strategic mistake. But my submission to you is that there is no difference between the ideology of communism and ideology of Islamism and the ideology of the church as it existed before the Treaty of Westphalia, that is when the secular nation state came into being. And of course, there's no difference in the ideology with the communists either. It is the same totalitarian methodology. It is the same hatred of the unbeliever, and it is same preying upon a certain hated class. So the communists could pick up in Soviet Union also. Jews were very badly persecuted. You have all historical evidences to that. Then Soviet Union found what is called kulaks. Similarly, Hitler found Jews and merchants. Church found the infidels. All of them, that same binary fashion, they found their hatreds and they persecuted those hatreds, and they ran totalitarian regimes, and there's absolutely no difference. I do not find any difference between communism, Islamism, churchism, let's put it that way, and communism.
Yes, and if actually quote a Nazi person, there's a Rudolf Hoss. He was a person who had actually organized these extermination camps, and he was master of it. He writes that the Reich Security Head Office issued to the commandments a full collection of reports concerning to the Russian concentration camps. So idea emerged. So the concept of the whole design of this concentration camp, what the Nazis made, came out of the reports which they got about the Russian concentration camp. And then he further writes that these described in a great detail the conditions in an organization of the Russian camps and supplied by former prisoners who had managed to escape. Great emphasis was placed on the fact that the Russians, by the massive employment of forced labor, had destroyed whole peoples. So, again, just replace the words and you can fit in all the ideologies together. The noun needs to be replaced and it's all can be defined in any of the quotation or the citation which is being spoken about them. And it goes always about believer and the non-believer. And communism is no different than one of the religion.
Yes, right. And let's also discuss the violence that is perpetrated by the West Bengal communists and the Kerala communists. That's not been any less horrific than what the communists in Russia or the communists in China perpetrated. And that happened in plain sight in a democratic polity. So they must be called more skillful than the rest, because
Yes.
they were not in a totalitarian setting and still they managed to carry out massacres like the Marijhapi massacre, managed to carry out
Pari.
the Shinbari. They also killed those Anand Margi. They burned those Anand Margi monks
Yeah.
right on the streets in Calcutta. Just imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. And the
And,
cars.
and nothing happened. Not one guy was brought to justice. Look at the way
Yeah.
the Kerala communists are functioning, and
Yeah.
the way they wantonly kill anybody that comes in their way, and yet they manage to talk about democracy. So I would think that that is far more skillful than the authoritarian ways of the Russians and the Germans and the Chinese.
No, again, this is very much a matter of time, which if one considers the time as a perspective, then what was happening in Soviet Union was back then, and the only two countries which are actually witnessing this kind of massacres, despite being a democracies. Like of late, we also saw China as a very democratic land, though everyone knows that CCP is the only party, but everyone knows that it functions till the time when we COVID was not much exposed. Everyone was not very much aware that China is also another totalitarian land even till now. But coming back to India in 2000s, and from like if we start talking about 1970s, 80s, and every decade actually we witnessed the amazing massacres what they did, and it was so skillful, as you rightly said, because Indian democracy is something which is there to, if I put, it is there to protect everyone. It somehow gives like democracy is an umpire which is going to safeguard you while you're playing a cricket match or something like that. But and that also the kind of massacres what they did. Say if we start with the 1970 thing, that whole this thing of Sangbari killings, and the way and it was again interestingly it was a Congress leader who was massacred, and his mother was made to eat the rice with his blood soaked into the rice. And this is something which who civilized person will ever try to even think of it. So this also gives me a hint that somehow their idea is very. I don't believe in a stone age or those kind of concepts, but still living in a dark age ideas where they are going to kill you, where they are going to brutally assassinate you, and they will cross any limits. Like how the Naxals, we always hear that Naxals do very severe kind of killing, but these people in the mainstream politics, because the massacre which was done in Sanbari killing was a mainstream politicians, if I put it that way, and then also in fact nothing much happened there too, and still it kept on continuing. Then the next it happened in 1979, then Maijapi massacre, which you already spoke about, and the way the more either people were they were killed, there were tear gases which were used, and many people in fact fell off in the sea and they were eaten by in the water bodies by crocodiles, and lot many things happened. So that was again too barbaric, and we don't know the death toll of that massacre as well, because as usual there too it was hidden. And who was not killed? There were children, there were ladies, and there were old ones, and everyone was killed. There was no second thought. Then
Estimated that the toll was the toll could be up to 10,000, which is
yeah, this is correct. The basic estimate, but we never had any official estimate for this as well. It was never put across. And the interesting thing is that in the Anand Margi Mox thing, which happened, which you rightly said that they were, they had just come for an educational conference, and there was nothing to do because they just thought that they are going to come out as an opposition against the whole idea of CPI and things like that. And they were in the whole daylight, and the taxi which was carrying the monks and sannyasis, they were just burned. And and still, as you said, that no one has been brought to the book. That no one even knows that who were actually the perpetrators. They never came out with it. And then the whole thing of and they talk about, see, and communists are the people who are not going to be of anyone. I don't know why Muslims also get fooled by them. In the Nanur massacre which happened in July 2000, there also they killed the Muslims. So again, and in China also they have killed Muslims so massively. So I don't know why they are behaving like some tube light which is never going to lighten. Communists are not going to support you guys. Muslims need to understand it very categorically, and perhaps communists are,
they're going to use them.
yeah, they're going to use them. It's the foolishness of the Muslims that they are not understanding it, because communists will just walk out very safe. They will be very clear about it because they have nothing to do with any religion. And then whole those when these things of Nandigram massacre which happened there too. Okay, so Bengal has been a burning camp of the communists, where they have been killing and killing since the direct action day. They have been very active in massacring the people, And though I believe that Kerala has become more radical and more active right now because of the communist massacres, especially after the 2014, especially it has been a bit more active. But Bengal has been always been the hotbed of the communists to kill the people of the other ideologies, or rather anyone who is not communist, if I put it across, because the Muslims were also massacred there.
Yes, sir. And the thing with the communists and the Islamists are that they try and use each other. And whenever either one of them comes to power, then they finish off the other one. Like in Iran, the Iran
Yes,
revolution was led by the Tudeh party, who were communist. And when
yes,
Tudeh party had won the revolution, and then they appointed this Ayatollah Khomeini. The first thing that he did was to finish off the Tudeh party completely and hanged most of them and completely demolished the communists. Similarly, when the
yes,
communists came to power in Soviet Union, they completely finished the Turkic culture from Central Asia. And right now, you're watching what is happening in Chinese Uyghur province, the Xinjiang province. So I
yes,
think that's been the template every time. Now let us go to another issue, and that is the mental colonization of the youth. And
yes,
that brings us to the topic of the cultural Marxism and the post-modernism, the two foremost communist-inspired theories. And of course, the communists received a death blow due to two major events. And one was when Deng Xiaoping said that to be rich is glorious. I think that was the first death knell in the communist ideology. And the second was, of course, a physical event, and that is when the Soviet Union collapsed. The Soviet Union collapsing was a complete physical negation of all that communism stood for. So the hardcore communism did not even last a century, if you really look at that.
yes.
But what they have done is that they have kind of metamorphosed their methodology and they have gone into corrupting the minds of the youth. So
Yes.
let us share your views and let us also have some solutions to this.
See, if I start Russia,
Just
if
before you start your reply to this question, let me request my viewers to please share, subscribe, and like this video. Press the bell icon, and also if you can contribute a little bit, that will be welcome. Plus, keep shooting your questions. I've got Aabhas for the first time in this live Q&A mode, so please don't spare him. Keep asking as many questions as you can. Yes, Abbas.
so actually Russia collapsed largely because they were becoming too much communist, and China sustained because they choose not to be the communist the way it was supposed to be. So it might seem a bit metaphoric and a bit abstract, but if I explain it further, Russia was not following the concept of the cultural revolution, and they were more into the idea of globalization, where everything is open and this globe is one world and the things like that. On the contrast, when Mao came to power, and then he had thought it very clearly that my idea will be all about respecting the ethnicity of my land, and I have to really talk about my own, because China also has whole past of expansionism. Their whole past has been about whether it we start talking from 200 BC, and they always have been engaged in expansionism. So Mao had already got the whole idea, which was set to really flourish his idea of communism based on the ethnicity of China, which was not the case much with the Russia. Because if we go for the past of Russia, then Russian past is something very different. And when you further go deeper, then people will even come to know that it was also known as a land of Hindu idea completely, a very strong Hindu idea. Though China was also Hindu, but Russia had a lot of connect with the worship of Shiva, and it was also called Rishi Bhumi. I'm not getting the exact name, something like that. So Russia has got a very different ethnicity than what China too had. of late. Now, Mao could work upon it because he had whole people support because of ethnicity, and it is still spranging. But again, the Mao's idea or the Mao thought or the Maoism is what we popularly call it as, has also kept on evolving with the time. It didn't let it die out as is the idea of Leninism and Marxism. It always stepped beyond that, and it always respected the Chinese culture to some extent and carrying the people idea at the same time. Now, there's a curious case in India, especially. In India, what generally happens is that our communists have always, they don't have any originality of idea. They have been following Marx and Lenin blindly. And say when Gangadhar Adhikari first wrote the paper of the whole position paper, that how they are going to stand for the partition, where he says that wherever is the Muslim ethnicity, all the land needs to become uh, the Muslim national. They will become the Muslim nations. He was all pro Pakistan and pro further more divisions. जितने टुकड़े हो सकते हैं. तो this is what where the whole thesis of टुकड़े टुकड़े gang, what we call it, comes from. So they're the patrons of this Gangadhar Adhikari idea who have established JNU. And if I go a bit into background that people need to, I'm sure that many would be aware, but when Indira Gandhi government didn't got much of a majority, then it was the communists who supported, and they just want one ministry. That's why HRT ministry. And when Nurul Hasan came in, then he collapsed the whole idea of R.C. Mazumdar's book, which was being translated into various languages, where he had decolonized a lot of Western books. The whole book of the 11 volumes were about the Indian civilization. That translation job was completely stopped. And then that is when the whole idea of Brahmanism and the caste system came in as the idea of the class operation system. So here the class was replaced by the caste. This is how they could relate to it with. Somehow this whole story was being built upon. So from 1967 onward, the academia, especially the humanities, was completely set in a way that people will either talk about the class system in perspective of the caste system of India, and they will further talk about the postmodernism, that is the further fragmentation and fragmentation. Now, postmodernism didn't work in China. They didn't follow the postmodernism that way. They were more rooted to the cultural idea, and they wanted to expand China. Our idea was somewhat very reverse. Gangadhar Adhikari wanted to fragment, fragment, and fragment. So there is no even a comparison to the Chinese communist and the Indian communist on any foreground. Indian communists, I also believe that they are being badly used by the China largely now, because Soviet doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, if people would be knowing, I'm sure that many would be aware of it. Communist Party also split on the line because of their someone had got affinity towards the Russia and someone had for China. So though there was a affinity for the whole globalization, and one had this affinity of being, just a pet of the China, if I put it very clearly, because none of them are subscribing to the idea of either Russia or the China, nor they are. And in fact, Marx himself was so confused about his own ideas of, because the idea of communism is very utopian, as I always say, but utopia is something very positive word. I think that we need to find a word which is more about something related to hell, because it will always drag you towards a hell. It will never take you to a heaven, so it cannot be utopia. It is not possible.
It is dystopia.
Yeah, correct. It's a dystopia, exactly. And today I wrote something about it on my general summing up, that communism, if it's to be summed up, it's a whole idea that there are two students who appear in the exam, and one is a drug addict and just fails in the exam, he gets 20 marks. The other one prepares so hard, he gets 95 marks. A communist will say that, both needs to get out of 100, 50-50. So they will say that. So this is the idea of, if a capitalist, someone has built on his own capitals, he has built on his empire, whatever someone may want to call it. It has happened because of a certain amount of effort, certain amount of skills. But he says that irrespective of the skills, both needs to be rewarded the same. And this is the dystopian state, which will never happen. And if it happens, it's a complete disaster. It will collapse everything. Even a communist regimes will not exist if they follow this whole idea of communism. So it's, and an amazing oxymoron, if I put it across. This whole idea of communism is such a fallacy, and our guys gets affected to it because the academia was completely corrupted, and when this whole JNU came into the picture, and this whole tukre tukre idea was what Gangadhar Adhikari did in the 40s was translated into our guys who, like, Umar Khalid or Kanhaiya Kumar are nothing but the offspring of the idea of what Gangadhar Adhikari wrote long back. They are just doing what the master had said. They are not doing anything different to it. They are not doing what China wants. They are doing what Gangadhar Adhikari wanted. They are trying to fragment India in the multiple parts because they are unable to understand that the whole ethos of India, or even say that I am not a very pro caste system, but when it comes to even the caste system, the way the whole narrative is put, it was not that distorted. And somehow there was a period in between when 1960s, 70s, and 80s, like how my father tells that the people either were in this on the side of the science or the humanities. So humanities were only reading humanities, and the science students were least bothered. Either the middle class had this aspiration, either they have to become doctor or engineer. There was no other. So one crowd was completely going to this socialist controlled institutions or the communist controlled institutions, and who were entering into the IITs or the BITS and other premier institutes of technologies. They were not even bothered about that what this whole humanity thing is about. So we have lost a lot of time, around 3-4 decades. And now, yes, a lot of people from the science background also are taking a lot of interest in understanding the humanities. So that is giving us a lot of edge that someone even out of those institutions are looking to understand the subject. And when you don't read from the books of what from the those who followed Gangadhar Adhikari, then definitely the thought will be different. Like for me, Sitaram Goel would be the first one to pick up the history, or maybe R.C. Mazumdar. I won't be going to pick up a book of Romila Thapar, though I too started with it. So the things are changing because, and those things will take a bit of time, but it will happen.
You mentioned Romila Thapar. She is a professor, eminent professor of ancient Indian history, and she doesn't know Sanskrit. Similarly,
Yeah,
Irfan Habib is an eminent professor of medieval history, and he doesn't know either Persian or Arabic. So that is the level of these communist teachers. They only know dogma and ideology. They don't know their subjects. Let's go to the questions now, Abbas. There were plenty of questions piled up for you. This is the first question. Shashikant Sharma is asking comments about Bharatiya Majdoor Sangh in comparison with C2 and Intak, etc. Can BMS raise voice about genuine issues of labor class without communism? Similarly, Bharatiya Kisan Sangh and Swadeshi Jagran Manch. I think a very good question.
see, I personally believe that communism should not be part of any idea. If I put it across, and there are a lot many things which can be done without communism. And similarly, the whole issue of the farmers, which are quite concerning right now, because what has happened currently about the farms bill, because I know where it's coming. So it has again got through a lot of distortions, like how it happened with CAA. See, like right now, also a lot of people are talking about the farms bill, but they perhaps have not read it, or they don't want to really speak about what has been written into it. Now, coming to what BMS would be doing and how they will be really catering to the issues of the laborers and labors, then it has to be taken without the communism, because communism somehow is not going to be very pro to the farmers' idea. I do believe that it will not let them really function, because communism is all about drenching away the skills. And somehow if the farmers needs to grow, they have to become someone of very skillful ones, pro industrialization, someone very pro to the idea of expansion into a technology. But the idea by which the communists work, as I explained earlier, that their idea is not about how you're expanding and how you are progressing. Their idea is largely about whatever is available, let's distribute it equally among all. So somehow, if they also pick the tail of the communism, it will be an utter failure, and nothing good will really come out. And I don't see a lot of match between Kisan Sangh and the BMS, and because they come with a very distinct kind of ideologies, and that is somewhat makes them a bit different.
Okay, next question. Muhammad blocked the way for Marx to become another prophet. Communism
Yeah.
behaves as an extension of Islam. Call Dr. Shankar Saran too for some Hindi audience. That's more of a suggestion and an observation. So thank you for that. Next question, Leo Lannister. So don't you think democracy is corrupt and slow? Can't we create some new system which has all flavors, good of all systems? I guess all systems also means communism.
Yeah, because this is with the idea with communism sprang in, that the moment you want to fix everything is correct, and then it will never happen, right? And the moment you see everything around, nothing is perfect. Like if I cite you that from a designer's perspective, symmetry is something which looks very perfect, isn't it? Symmetry, सब कुछ बड़ा अच्छा है. But symmetry is something what designers use when he's having a lack of idea. तो ये इधर है, उसका मिरर कर दिया, सिमेट्री हो गया, सब कुछ परफेक्ट. But nothing in this world is going to be symmetric or perfectly in order. And if things are not perfectly in order, they are actually in order. So coming back to, and I don't think that democracy is corrupt and slow. Democracy is something which is of the people and by the people. And I see that there are a lot of flaws in our, there are a lot of flaws in our constitution in terms of how the whole discourse of the minority is taken up. That they don't define minority, but the provisions for the minority. They talk about the minority institutions. They are flaws, but we have provisions to amend it. That's the power of constitution. That's the power of democracy. Had it not been democracy, then perhaps you will not be even able to really resolve a book by which you need to work upon. So democracy is always a way forward, and we have been seeing it right from the Rig Veda, and there have been perfect examples of democracies in the past. And so we are not a very flawed democracy, I would say. We are a very good democracy where the things are changing a lot strongly. Things are changing big time, whether it was about the Delhi rights book or whatever. So the issues are being addressed in the right order, in the right direction. It's not slow. It's in the right order. We are a bit slow to realize that what our power is.
Actually, if I may add, uh, you may ask this question only in a democracy. When you are in the other kind of systems, then all you can think is survival. But in democracy, you have the liberty, you have the time, and you feel free enough to ask these questions. You wouldn't dare it in China or the erstwhile Soviet Union. Anand Kumar, this is just a contribution, so thank you, Anand Kumar ji. Mridul Sohal also expound upon a certain saffron communism within RSS plus BJP ecosystem that made Modi ji so long to turn the tide against and move to free market. Okay.
So,
I,
would you like to take
I,
the
I
question?
call this, I have a term for this phenomenon. I call this the supplication to Nehruism or an ode to Nehruism. All Nehru critics still sing paeans to Nehruism. So I think that's what the question is.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Are you taking up this question?
No, I said that you please take it up. I
So, okay, so I think this is what I have. That is my take. That what you say is actually correct because people have yet to come out of the idea of Nehruism. They have come out of the shadow of Nehru. That Nehruism still holds. And today itself, I did a video on Nehruism. Oh, I think the previous video was that on Nehruism. So you might like to have a look at that. That explains everything. Next one, please. Sir, please suggest some books to read about the untold history and politics and culture that we don't get in schools or libraries.
do you want to take it, or I? They are actually
This is
amended.
addressed to you. You are the guest, so I give you the first opening.
So I always recommend people to read both West and our side books, because at times that we keep on cribbing about the other ideologies, that Western ideology like Marxism and communism, but we don't have fair amount of idea that what they are. We don't understand that what Nazism or National Socialists were about. So I will recommend people to start reading the works of Marx, Lenin, and the essays of Stalin to start off with. Yes, we have to be pro to the culture, but it's very important to know your enemies or the people who really want to destroy your culture. And you can't even critique them, what we call Purupaksha, that unless you have known them better. So it's important to read the Western philosophers and the ideas and the books which from their side. And as far as the books from our side are concerned, we must, we need to read books of the leftists also and our side as well. In this like most of the times when I went on to rubbish the argument that Mughals made India richer, I never took any references from R.C. Mazumdar or Sitaram Goel. I had enough material from the works of Irfan Habib, the Cambridge Economic History of India. And then I had enough fodder from the people whom they caught, like Angus Madison's whole contours of world economy from 1 to 230 AD. Then we need to read a lot of works of Irfan Habib as well, that what they are up to. Then of course there are the books of R.C. Mazumdar, then there are works of Sitaram Goelji, which are, I believe, that a must to read. And the works of Will Durant will make a lot of sense to people to understand India from a Western perspective, which is put in very rightly in order. One may find a lot of distorted terminologies also, like Aryan and the things like that. But that apart, that book is very pro-India, I would say, and that is very pro-truth put across, because that was a period when everyone was delusioned with this idea of Aryan and all those things. But that doesn't take away the merit of the works of Will Durant.
Right. Next question. Rajendra Singh. How much damage has Russia done to us apart from killing our serving PM at Tashkent? Why many people still think Russia is our friend?
No countries, when it comes to politics is all. I always say that, and people often get pissed about it also, that why I'm saying this. But politicians and the politics is always gray. It's not very transparent, and it will always, because politics is always employed to play for the welfare of own people. So Russia would be doing something for their own people, and we would be doing for our own people. But the whole conspiracy of how Lal Bahadur Shastri was killed again has got a lots of edges and lots of things related to it. Because Stalin, because if we go in the past of the Russian relationship with India, people say that Stalin was pro-Nehru also at times. But the words which Stalin has uttered about Nehru will keep people, can't even imagine that what he called Nehru. So somehow at times it becomes very tough to believe that Russia was actually instrumental, because when a certain agency is exterminating someone, it doesn't mean that a whole of a country as a polity is involved in it. There are many deep states which exist everywhere, whether it is in India, it would be in Russia, it would be in America. So it's not always the case that a whole state machinery has conspired it or transpired it. So I believe that we must be progressive about the relationship with Russia, because we have not only the relationship of the current time, but we share a civilizational connect with them. And if one goes on to read the history and really the antique past, they will see a lot of remnants of Hindu faith or Sanatan Dharma which exists in Russia. So they are really one of us.
Okay. Next one. Rajat Sharma. If China and us were to unite, could they overwrite Indian identity solely on subversion through media and academia? If yes, then with how much efforts?
I don't see that China and India would ever be able to unite. It's my very clear understanding. It's very tough for China and India to unite. The reason being that somehow it comes from very antiquity, the way from the past itself, that the way China operates is not very similar to how India operates. And you don't make a combination of two differently operating countries. So I see it very non-feasible idea that that collaboration would not happen anytime soon, or it will never happen and shouldn't happen, rather, I believe. And as far as and even if it happens, I don't think that yes, of course they will try to supersede the Indian identity, but India is not the same what it was long back. It has changed. It has got a lot of soft power, and there are many things. It is again a very long, stretchable thing which one can speak upon and discuss upon. But that's, I think, a very dystopian idea to me.
The next question is very interesting. It says, why communists sport a rough beard, tinted specs, neck towel? Why do they have frowning, unsymmetric face, hanging lips, eyebrow raised, and shout and make hand gestures? Uh, I think they also need investigation like they are doing in Bollywood.
Perhaps yes, and that can be the reason. And you know, and the because you see, these are all comes from idea that most of the communists come hail from the background of either liberal arts, or when I say liberal art, I mean to say about the fine arts or some kind of art activities and things like that. And if you closely observe the artist, most of the time it's their personality as such that, say, when I do personally do painting, I am so paint would be here and whatnot, and my country, I would be the same as how I used to be back then as a comrade. So it has more to do with the subject which they connect to, and I don't think that it can be delusional also for the politician, because I have not been a politician communist, so I can't comment upon what they feel to do it. But for me, it was that I still, when I get drenched into when I'm writing and think, my beard just goes like, what length, I won't be aware. And so I don't see that they are doing it with any intention or something like that. But politicians might be doing it just to delusion the people that we are the garib ones. And
Okay. We can put NCB also. Next question, Atul Kumari. Democracy is like Duckworth Lewis, always helping Muslims and communists.
I don't think democracy is like Duckworth Lewis, because we can understand democracy. Duckworth Lewis, not many have figured out. So, it's not that complex. So, the only thing is that the basic question starts off with that: how many of us have even read the Constitution? That is where the major problem lies. That if I ask people that where you see that there is a problem in the Constitution, so for me, the problem in the Constitution comes especially is with the Article 31. So there are many such before that also the articles are there. There are problems with that, but for that one needs to read the whole Constitution holistically, and we have started reading it. That's why there's some insurgence or some kind of fire among the people to get the things corrected, because democracy has given you the due course and the process to amend the things. Amendment is a great power, and we have not used much in the past, but people can make it happen. So we need to start reading democracy and the constitution to begin with.
All right. Then I think we have a couple of more questions. Shnejis, can't we convince Nepal to sign security pact with us, just like Bhutan, considering China grabbing their land, strategic threat for us as well?
Nice, sir. You can take this question. It's more about bureaucracy and diplomacy.
Okay, let me tell you this, that Nepal is, as a matter of fact, had even offered to merge with India, but our great Pandit Nehru. Why is he called Pandit? I never known. I think he's never exuded any wisdom, and he also was pointedly anti-casteist and anti-communist, but he still liked to adorn himself as Pandit. Anyway, you can call him Nawab Nehru. He was more of a dictator. Uh, so he just refused, exactly like he refused Oman's offer to sell Gwadar, or he refused the offer of the state of Kalat to have some kind of a Western India. And Kalat is major part of Balochistan. Or then he also had offer of having a couple of other strategic islands and all. But according to me, and I've been talking to Rajnikant Puranik, who's written that 97 Blunders of Nehru. Very clear that this man was strategically blind. I mean, it's a folly to even call him naive. He just did not understand international strategy. And he was a very peculiar kind of a man with a deep inferiority complex. And in front of any white skin, he would grovel, and to his own people, he would try and lord over them. So, with that kind of inferiority complex, he did all these things, and that even Nepal, we signed that pact with Nepal, in which we have practically a borderless kind of a situation. We are two nations without borders practically for all practical purposes. And the people are also similar, the backgrounds are similar, the culture is similar, the civilization is similar. And why we don't have a security pact with Bhutan is because we lost the opportunity when we had one. Next question, Anuj Desai. They vilified Hindu resistance, attacked right-wing Hindu extremists or Hindutva. Why New India doesn't expose the evil axis by using the term Islamo-leftists? Why so afraid? Well, Mr. Tariq Fateh has coined a very nice word, which we also use quite often. It's called Sharia Bolsheviks. So, Islamo-leftist by comparison is too pedestrian. I would suggest we use Sharia Bolsheviks, which has been made popular by Mr. Tariq Fateh. What do you say, Abbas ji?
I completely agree to this, and with the Islamo leftists will be a bit too weak for them to weak to use for them the way they behave. And as far as the Hindutva is considered, it's not anything wrong to be called Hindutva. Hindutva is our nature, so it's not comparable with any extremism or anything as such. So yeah, that's my submission about it.
Okay, so there it is. We come down to the last question today. Okay, one more after this. Natural for poor people to lean left. How to undo this?
I don't think it's natural for poor people to lean to the left because the most of the poor people whom I have met, they are too much rooted to the culture and civilization than the all people who come with the privileges and who are elite. Yes, it happens that if you land up in JNU or somewhere, if they find that you are quite vulnerable, they will attack you, and a few becomes the victims like Kanhaiya Kumar. So there would be cases, but I don't believe in the thing that poor can be persuaded by communists that much as the rich ones are, because they are not at all rooted into culture in many places, and that hampers.
Right. Commies in electoral politics only Nepal and India? I don't think so. What about Venezuela?
I don't think it's gonna be.
Yeah, so it's actually it's not correct. There's a lot of other places where also these commies they take part in the electoral politics. A number of
Yes.
places in Europe as well,
Yeah.
especially Eastern Europe and Central Europe, and a lot of other parties which do not actually call themselves communists are practically communists for all practical purposes. And sometimes they transform themselves. Look at the way the Democrats are behaving these days in the US. They are some kind of quasi-communists only. Look at Jerome Corbyn, the UK Labour Party. He practically made them completely communists. So that's actually not a, I would say, a factually correct question. So that brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much, Abbasji, and to our viewers who have come here for the first time. I would request you that before leaving the session, do please subscribe, and also to all others who are our regular subscription. Oh, there's one more question that has come up while we were leaving. Uh, Sir, do you think we are at war with multi-face of communism, be it Abrahamic enterprise or political communism? How, as a civilization, we can be organized as we have internal issues which takes our resources?
I don't think that communism, or actually, communism is also one of the one of the same as the all other Abrahamic religions, and which tries to, so it's all between, as we said, discussed earlier also, it's a war between the believers and the non-believers, and it will keep on happening till the time the idea of communism is completely crushed, or people really understand the problems of the communism. And I don't think nothing can replace anything than literacy. And when I say literacy, I don't mean the literacy per se that though Kerala is one of the most literate state, but the most ISIS terrorists comes from there, from Indian thing. But what I mean to say that people really need to understand the subject of communism thoroughly. They need to then understand about our culture and why this whole conflict happened. Unless we really understand the reason behind this conflict, we won't be able to ever short it completely. So the Western discourse of communism and our own dharmic discourse needs to be put into a reading purview.
Okay, last question. Islamist Christ conversion को undo कैसे करें?
I think that it again lies back to the fact that we will have to do a lot of work at the academic level, where a lot of thoughts needs to be given upon the scientific rationalities of scientific logics of our past. Because what I understand is that youth is always attracted towards the logic, the rational, the truth of the thing. And somehow our educational discourse has failed to really translate it. That when I say that, calculus had actually developed very largely in the Kerala school of mathematics when Madhavacharya did it in the 14th century, when Aryabhatta had actually laid the principles of the differential calculus. So this will, even if it is not part of the academia, if a teacher just utters it around the student when he starts the course of calculus in the standard 11 and things like that, student will be charged enough not to be attracted with the problem which might come up front. So a lot of work needs to go at an academic level. I just cited example of calculus. It may be very high-fi because the things start happening at a very elementary level. But again, the stories from our Puran, from Panchtantra, and our stories needs to be part of the discourse every day. That will keep them rooted, and this conversion will automatically go off. We need to have rational logic and scientific argument, which can only save the whole civilizational discourse.
Okay, so one last question. Won't communists know about the evils and history of communism? Do they deliberately want to destroy our civilization? I think short answer is yes.
Yes, of course they want to destroy the civilization and the whole and it's not about, if you talk to a communist and say that you guys killed 150 million people, and they will say that it's a joke, and they will try to justify it other way, like we discussed earlier, that when we say that Marx spoke about the genocide, and they say that he's actually talking about the cultural genocide, he's not talking about the genocide. So they have got the multiple ways to justify the wrongdoings. So it's very
Okay.
it's very tough to fight them that way. But again, I was a communist, but I was not captive to those kind of ideas. Rather, I was a rationalist or a logical person who wanted science, and science gave me the way out. And the only way is that get people educated about the subject.
Okay, Abbas, thank you very much. You've been wonderful. You've taken a lot of questions with a lot of patience. This is finally it. No more questions. Thank you very much. Good night. Jai Hind. Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram.